Okay, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something that might sound a little dry at first glance, but it is absolutely the secret weapon of environmental auditing. We usually think of environmental management as being all about the physical stuff: solar panels, emission filters, cutting down on waste, that kind of thing. And I mean, it is, but before any of those physical changes can actually happen, there has to be a shared language. Without a standardized way to define what we're actually measuring, the entire global standard basically just falls apart. So today, we're looking specifically at ISO 14001-26 Clause 2 and how its normative references, specifically the ISO 14050 vocabulary, anchor environmental compliance in undeniable objective reality. Picture this. An auditor walks into a facility and flags a specific process for pollution. But the facility manager pushes back, saying, wait a minute, that's not pollution, that's just a byproduct, and we mitigate it. So, who's right? Well, without standardized definitions, environmental compliance instantly descends into subjective chaos. It literally becomes a battle of opinions rather than a rigorous scientific assessment of risk. And let's be real, if words are left open to personal interpretation, the entire certification process loses its credibility fast. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the ambiguity trap, move into Clause 2's normative foundation, explore our ultimate dictionary in ISO 14050, clear up the whole aspects versus impacts confusion, see how this harmonizes with other business systems, and finally, look at the baseline for compliance. Let's get into it. Section 1, the ambiguity trap, when definitions derail audits. Think about an organization that operates across multiple continents, or, hey, even just multiple departments in the same building. In those environments, ambiguous language is the enemy of sustainability. When terms like impact, prevention, or risk are just left up to whoever's on shift that day, you get flawed risk assessments in totally fragmented practices. One facility might classify a minor chemical spill as a massive environmental incident, while another facility in the exact same company might just wipe it up and not even record it. That leads to wildly inconsistent nonconformities during audits. And when the audits are inconsistent, well, stakeholders, regulators, and the public completely lose confidence in the certification itself. Moving on to Section 2. Clause 2, the normative foundation. And remember, this is mandatory, not optional. So to solve this ambiguity trap, ISO 14001-2026 relies heavily on Clause 2, which introduces this concept of normative references. Basically, this is where the standard puts its foot down and sets the absolute rules of engagement for how we interpret the text. And the absolutely crucial point here is that these are not optional guidelines. They aren't just polite suggestions you can ignore if they're inconvenient. They are mandatory tools required to interpret the entire management system globally. When Clause 2 cites a normative reference, it's basically telling the auditor and the organization, hey, you must use this specific document to understand the words written in this standard. It creates an unshakable, shared reality. And this is where the magic happens, honestly. Normative references take these lofty, abstract environmental requirements and transform them into hard, operationally measurable audit criteria. Without these references, an auditor's findings would really just be subjective judgment. If an auditor writes up a nonconformity, the organization might just argue it away. But with normative references backing them up, the auditor's findings become defensible, internationally accepted facts anchored to a specific, agreed-upon baseline. Section 3, ISO 14050, the Environmental Dictionary. Think of it as the Rosetta Stone of auditing. Enter the real star of the show. ISO 14050 is the primary normative reference that acts as the ultimate legal dictionary for environmental management terminology. If ISO 14001 is the law of the land, ISO 14050 is the dictionary that defines every single word in that law. It provides incredibly precise definitions for all these complex terms. Just look at this list. These are the heavy hitters of environmental management. By defining exactly what pollution prevention or compliance obligations actually mean, ISO 14050 ensures consistency across geographical regions and shuts down narrow interpretations. A factory in Germany and a factory in Brazil are held to the exact same conceptual standard because, well, they're using the exact same dictionary. And this shared vocabulary builds a highly structured, wonderfully objective workflow for auditors. It takes them right from identifying an issue to objectively classifying a nonconformity. So, step 1, the auditor spots an environmental aspect on the factory floor. Step 2, they mentally or literally consult the ISO 1450 definition. Step 3, they use that definition to establish objective audit criteria. And finally, step 4, if there's a gap between the criteria and reality, they classify it as a nonconformity objectively. Boom. There's no room for debate because the dictionary has spoken.
Section 4, defining aspects versus impacts. Let's clear up some major confusion here.
To really understand the power of this dictionary, let's look at a classic trap in environmental auditing. It's an area where organizations trip up all the time. Okay, so an environmental aspect is the interaction with the environment. For example, a manufacturing facility using chemical solvents that emit fumes. The environmental impact, on the other hand, is the actual change to the environment. In this case, the contribution to photochemical smog. The aspect is the cause, the impact is the effect. If a factory mixes up the operational aspect with the actual environmental impact, their entire risk evaluation falls apart. They end up trying to manage the smog out in the atmosphere rather than just controlling the solvent use on their floor. See the difference?
Section 5, harmonizing the high-level structure, specifically the Annex SL framework.
Now, pull back for a second and look at the bigger picture. This terminology doesn't just live in an environmental vacuum. It plugs straight into the overall business management structure known as Annex SL. A facility can run their environmental, quality, and safety systems simultaneously because they all share the exact same structural definitions. Whether you're dealing with environmental impacts in ISO 14001, product quality in ISO 9001, or worker safety in ISO 45001, core concepts like context of the organization and risk mean exactly the same thing. The underlying architecture is identical. What this means for you is that organizations don't have to reinvent the wheel for every single standard. The baseline language is already set. You don't need a separate procedure for identifying context for safety, and then another one for environment, and then a third for quality. You just build one integrated management system. That saves massive amounts of time, slashes documentation duplication, and makes cross-discipline compatibility a reality.
Section 6, the baseline for compliance. Let's see this objective auditing in practice. At the end of the day, an audit is basically about proving you do what the law and your own policies require. ISO 14050 definitions give auditors the exact lens they need to separate, say, a strict legally binding wastewater limit from a voluntary corporate pledge to become carbon neutral by 2050. It defines compliance obligations broadly enough to catch both strict regulatory laws and the expectations of diverse stakeholders, like local communities or your major customers. By using this standard, an organization creates a rock-solid, auditable compliance register that an auditor can easily verify.
So, the huge takeaway here is that by strictly adhering to this standardized vocabulary, audits actually mean something. They become reliable, defensible, and genuinely capable of driving global sustainability. When definitions limit subjective interpretation, an auditor isn't just giving you their personal opinion. They're delivering an objective assessment based on an internationally agreed-upon standard. And honestly, that is exactly what gives ISO certification its weight and its global credibility. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on regarding your own organization's framework. When you claim to be preventing pollution or managing environmental risks, are you using the precise normative definitions established by ISO 14050? Or are your commitments subjective, ambiguous, and totally at risk of falling apart under the scrutiny of a real audit? Precision isn't just about passing a test. It's about actually protecting the environment. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to decode the systems that shape our world.